everyone, I'm Kara O'Brien. Welcome to this special edition of Destination Tomorrow. On this episode, we'll be focusing on food. Not just any type of food, but the food used in the space program. Food is obviously one of the most important factors for sustaining life here on Earth. Throughout history, its abundance has helped civilizations rise to great heights, while the lack of it has led to collapse. The abundance of food also played a major part in the role of early explorers and conquerors alike. One major problem that was faced by these groups was how to preserve the food that was brought on long journeys. Although techniques like pickling and salting helped keep some foods preserved, hunting and foraging accounted for the bulk of the food that was eaten. For example, during the Lewis and Clark expedition, the men in the Corps of Discovery generally ate about 9 pounds of meat apiece each day. The bulk of their food came from fresh game killed along the way, rather than from food stores that were brought with them. When game was scarce, they often traded beads and trinkets with local Indian tribes for fresh meats like grizzly bear, buffalo, and when all else failed, dogs. Having large amounts of food on hand played an important role in military campaigns as well. During his reign, Napoleon Bonaparte constantly found that providing food for his soldiers was often a harder task than fighting the battles. Napoleon famously stated that an army travels on its stomach, soup makes the soldier. In fact, Napoleon was so committed to finding a way to preserve food for his soldiers that a prize of 12,000 francs was offered to the first person who could invent a method to successfully preserve food. After years of trying, a Parisian named Nicolas Appert came up with an idea that worked. Appert successfully preserved food by partially cooking it, sealing it in glass bottles with a cork, then immersing the bottle in boiling water. This process allowed the remaining air to be expelled through the boiling process, keeping the food fresh. Appert's preservation technique proved so successful that he was awarded the 12,000 franc prize by Napoleon himself in 1810. This represented the origination of the modern canning process for food. Not to be outdone, by about 1812, the British Army was preserving food in tin cans rather than in glass bottles. Tin cans were much more durable than glass and proved to be easier to store. By about 1818, the British Navy was storing over 40,000 pounds of food preserved in cans on boarded ships, keeping crews well fed and healthy. This military use eventually trickled down into everyday civilian life, helping the general public live healthier lives as well. The preserving process became even more widespread in the late 1800s with Frenchman Louis Pasteur's work in germ theory. This theory proved that tiny living microbes caused food to spoil. In his research, Pasteur determined he could gently heat foods and liquids to a temperature that would kill the microbes without altering the taste. Then chilling the foods and liquids would prevent any remaining microbes from multiplying. This process is now known as pasteurization. Food preservation became even more interesting with the development of spaceflight. In order to undertake manned missions in microgravity, NASA scientists needed to understand the relationship between food and the astronaut in space. In the early days of the space program, scientists were unsure if the human body could physically even swallow food in space. The proof they were looking for came on the third Mercury flight when John Glenn consumed applesauce from an aluminum tube. Most of the early food items packaged for space were chosen more for utility than for taste. This is because in the pressurized weightlessness of space, things like crumbs, liquids, and odors do not simply go away. They float around the spacecraft, decreasing the air quality, while also being potentially distracting. To help alleviate this problem, most food was stored in aluminum tubes that look very similar to toothpaste tubes. There were also packages of small bite-sized cubes of food that were approximately half an inch in size. These cubes consisted of a high-calorie mixture of proteins, such as fruits and nuts, coated with an edible film to prevent crumbs. Although the meals contained the appropriate daily amount of calories, the food was not appealing to most astronauts. Often, crews would return from space having lost weight because they did not eat all of their assigned meat. To help find new ways to make food in space more acceptable, NASA scientists began experimenting with new types of food, new packaging, and new processing procedures. To help us understand how food is now prepared and packaged for spaceflight, Tonya Romain spoke with Connie Erdley at Space Food Systems Laboratory at NASA Johnson Space Center.
Food plays a very important role in everyone's life.
We all have a comfort food or a favorite food that helps us get through those stressful days. But many of us also have foods that we find objectionable for cultural reasons or simply for the way it tastes. This is true for astronauts in space as well as for us down here on Earth. But in the confines of a spacecraft, your food choices are somewhat limited. Because food is much more than just sustenance, affecting our mental happiness as well as our physical abilities, NASA researchers have worked hard to prepare meals that astronauts look forward to eating. But space is a unique environment, so the food not only has to taste good, it also has to have a long shelf life, it has to be able to be stowed effectively, and it has to be able to withstand the rigors of space. To help us understand exactly what goes into preparing food for space, I spoke with Connie Ertley in the Space Food Systems Laboratory at NASA's Johnson Space Center.
Food for the astronauts has changed extensively over the years. The days of Mercury are certainly gone. Cubes and tubes are no more. Astronauts eat a food system that's very similar to what they eat here on Earth. It's very familiar. All kinds of food items. They can eat steak, shrimp cocktail, chocolate pudding cake, you name it. They eat all kinds of food.
Here we have peanut cubes and sugar cookie cubes. How do you eat these, or what?
Well, again, these are from very early in the space program, and so these packages would be cut open. They would put these cubes in their mouth and consume them. These are one of the not so appetizing things, and this is how far our food has advanced. The only thing that they have now that they just cut open and pop in their mouth would be something like candy-coated peanuts or cookies or something like that. The rest of these food items, rehydratables, have to be rehydrated and heated before consumed. These types of food items, they also are heated before they are consumed, and they're just simply pouches are cut open with a pair of scissors, and the astronauts eat right out of it with regular utensils, so it's just like eating at home. Providing an acceptable food system is very important to us. Food fills a psychological need for the astronauts, so we take our jobs very seriously when we work to provide nutritious and tasty foods for the astronauts. So visual aspects of food is very important, as is taste. Food has to taste and look good for someone to want to eat it. So we take that very seriously. We've changed that from the beginning days, from tubes and cubes, and we provide things from tomatoes and eggplant and butterscotch pudding, all the way to peanut butter and cinnamon rolls. When developing, we don't just have something that meets the astronauts' nutritional needs. It has to look good and taste good, and when they open a pouch, you want them to smell, oh, that smells just like meatloaf, and that takes me home.
Connie, how many items are in the menu?
We have over 250 different food items on our food list, a huge variety of foods. All of these foods are shelf-stable food items. They do not need to be refrigerated or frozen. That is the driving factor in our food system. We have freeze-dried foods. Freeze-dried foods make up a big portion of the food system, specifically on the space shuttle. They are foods that have had the moisture removed, and before they can be consumed, they have to add water added back to them. And the labels on the food give the astronauts instructions on how to rehydrate the food properly.
This is our most favorite dish, shrimp cocktail. We add 3 ounces of cold water from the galley, and you can see the little rotary dial where you select the amount of water. And you see 2 switches there. The yellow is the hot and the blue is the cold. Then you kind of squish the water into the shrimps and wait about 10 minutes for the shrimps to totally rehydrate. And it actually comes together and forms a nice sauce. Now on Earth you might eat with a knife, spoon, and fork. In space, scissors and a spoon is all you need. And we use the scissors to open up the food tray. And one of the features of all of our food is that it has a lot of heavy sauce, which kind of holds it together. And then we just use a spoon, and because of the sauce, it doesn't float away. The surface tension holds it there. It's real nice.
Okay, so we have little Italian vegetables here, but we've got chicken. How do you not need to refrigerate the chicken salad?
Because the moisture has been removed in the food, that's what renders it shelf stable. There is nothing there that would spoil.
And when you add water to these,
Do they grow? Do the sizes grow like a sponge?
Slightly. There is a vacuum on all of these packages, so all the oxygen has been removed from the package, and that also helps extend its shelf life. So water is introduced through this septum, and it does fill out this pouch. This actual portion won't expand. The pouch will expand a little bit once that moisture is introduced, but this is the actual size. Freeze drying removes the water but doesn't disrupt the cellular integrity of the food, so you can add water back and you get exactly what you started with. This isn't a condensed version, it's just literally just missing the water.
And the portion sizes are fairly small. Why do you keep them that way?
Things do look small, and that is one of the questions that we get often, but when you're actually weighing food and giving what is a recommended serving size, they tend to be smaller than what the average person considers.
So you can't do the biggie size in space.
No super size, that's right.
And so there are no leftovers.
That's very important. What they do have in a serving size, they do need to consume it, because what they don't consume out of a package, that becomes trash, and that becomes something that has to be maintained, and not to mention, it could smell. If you don't eat an entire, say you're eating tuna fish and you don't eat an entire package of tuna fish, that's a smell you're going to have to live with for a long time, so it's to your advantage to consume the entire contents of the package.
And this is interesting. There's a cinnamon roll in here.
There is a cinnamon roll in here. This is an extended shelf life bread product. It also lasts at room temperature for a couple of years, which is very different from most of the bread products you can think of, because bread molds in a couple of weeks. These have been formulated so that the water activity, which is the amount of free moisture that would be available to microbes if they were present. This has been lowered so much that if there was anything present, it couldn't spoil the product.
And this is one of the older, you were saying it's come a long way. There aren't cans as much anymore, is that correct?
That's right. We have moved away from the can. We have very few items that are in cans right now. Off the top of my head, I can think of about 3 or 4. We have moved to the pouch. These foods are thermally processed. It's another word for canned food, or we also call it retorting. And the food inside of this container has been heat treated so that the food is what is called commercially sterile. We use this pouch for several reasons. This is a technology from the military. This is what looks like their meal ready to eat packages. However, these are our formulations in these packages. And the pouch is great because, one, when processing, it's not so rigid like this can, and in order to heat treat this can, you might end up over processing the food item. In this pouch, which is nice and flat and uniform, products don't get over processed, so you end up with a high quality food item. Also, what's really nice is they stow very efficiently. This pouch takes up a lot less room than a bulky rigid can, so we can stow more food items much more efficiently and use our container space as best that we can. And then last, it's a means of trash management. A can, again, is very bulky. You have an empty can to deal with in the trash. It takes up a lot of space. This just folds completely flat, and you can store a lot of empty pouches in a lot less space than you can store bulky cans.
And the drinks?
All of our beverages are powdered. All of them come in this type of package. They also have a label which tells them the name of the product plus how much moisture needs to be added to the product before consuming. What's unique about this is you have to have a special straw to consume this beverage. And this straw is inserted into this package. It actually opens up a septum, which it opens up a one-way valve. And so in microgravity, liquid's wanting to come right out of the straw. So we have a clamp on the straw to keep the liquid in. And then when the astronauts are ready to consume, they release the clamp. The liquid flows into their mouth. They have to clamp it off, and then they have to remember that above the clamp, they need to get that liquid out too, or else they've got some free liquid floating around. And the astronauts are encouraged to keep their fluid intake up. It's very easy to forget to drink in space, and so they're encouraged to do that often, and they have plenty of drinks to keep them very well hydrated. We also offer every combination of coffee and tea that you could imagine, so they have a wide selection to choose from.
But I say before you get the M&Ms, they have to eat their spinach.
In a perfect world, you would. We do plan menus for all of the astronauts so that their nutritional needs are met, but when it comes down to it, when they get ready to eat in space, they eat what they want to eat.
Coming up next, we'll find out why all the food flown into space has special cooking instructions. But first, did you know that the Space Shuttle Discovery took its name from Captain Robert Scott's famous Antarctic exploration vessel? The RRS Discovery was built in 1901, designed specifically for an extended Antarctic expedition. Because the vessel would be in Antarctica for over 2 years, it was required to carry enough food and equipment to support the 40-man crew until she could be resupplied. With about 35,000 pounds of preserved meats and another 42,000 pounds of flour, the Discovery left for Antarctica on August 6, 1901. Although there was a large supply of food aboard, the crew would also hunt seals and penguins, which helped prevent a common ailment of the time, scurvy. The Discovery returned from Antarctica on September 10, 1904, and in 1986 was opened to the public as a museum ship. It is now permanently moored in Dundee, Scotland. Let's rejoin Tonya and Connie back in the Food Systems Laboratory at NASA Johnson Space Center.
All of the food packages have a label on them, and it identifies the food, and it has some rehydration and heating information. This is vegetable quiche, and it actually says to add 50 milliliters of hot water and to heat for 5 to 10 minutes. So there are guidelines. They don't have to guess. This amount is so that the food properly hydrates, and this time is so that it has the time to properly hydrate, and then it's at its optimum for consuming.
The fuel cells used on the shuttle not only provide energy to run vehicle systems, but also produce water as a byproduct. Rather than dispose of this water, astronauts use it to help rehydrate their food. This system works so well that about half of the food and beverages now consumed aboard the shuttle are in the freeze-dried form. To help food move from the freeze-dried form to an edible meal, a piece of equipment called a rehydrator is used. The rehydrator measures the correct amount of water needed to be added to each food or drink package and allows the crew member to choose either hot or chilled water. Once the water is added to the food, it can be eaten in a matter of a few minutes. Although this might not sound very appealing, most crews give high marks for the food that's prepared for their missions. Why are some of these items packaged differently than others?
The different types of food items determine what type of package the food is packaged in. All of our freeze-dried rehydratables are in this, what we call an EDO package. It's this clear package that has a septum so that the food can be rehydrated. The other types of foods that are in clear packages are what we call our bite-size or just natural form foods, granola bars, cookies, candies, nuts. They're all in these clear types of packages. This is what was developed for the food system. However, these types of food packages are not 100% oxygen and moisture impermeable. They're actually overwrapped in these types of foil packages. We also provide condiments. Peanut butter is actually one of the condiments that we provide, very popular. We also have mustard, mayonnaise, ketchup, Tabasco sauce, relish, you name it. If we don't have it as a standard condiment, we'll get it for a crew member if they request it. Specifically, if they're on the space station and they request it, we want to keep them very happy. We also have salt and pepper, not your regular salt and pepper though, because if you had a regular salt and pepper shaker, it would go everywhere but the food, and that would create a huge mess. So we have liquid salt and pepper, and this is a saline solution, just salt and water. And then this is pepper. It's a pepper extract in vegetable oil.
We are in Houston, so tortillas are a specialty, I think.
Tortillas are very special. They might be one of the most popular food items that we have on the menu. They not only serve as a food item, they actually work as a tool also. They have replaced bread, and the astronauts use tortillas to make every combination that you could dream of.
So is all the food made here at Johnson?
Not all of the food is made here at the Johnson Space Center. There are some food items that are what we call COTS, commercially off-the-shelf items, things like candy-coated chocolates or a granola bar or crackers that we will actually buy from a food service distributor or from the grocery store, and then they're repackaged. Those are food items that don't need to be developed specifically for spaceflight. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
Do you put any special markings or anything on the packages so everybody knows whose food is whose?
All of the food items are actually color-coded. Each astronaut has a color that belongs to them. Right now, the station astronauts have red, yellow, and green dots, and so all they have to do is look on their food package, and in this corner of the label, is a color dot. And so if you're red, you can look for your red food. Now, if it's regular menu food, you might not be so hurt if someone happens to eat your red carrot coins, but if it's bonus food that you've specifically picked out for yourself, you're not going to be so happy when someone eats something that has a red dot on it or came out of a box that had your name on it.
Okay, some astronauts say that food actually tastes different once they get up there than what they've had down here when they were eating it. How do you compensate for that?
That is true. Some astronauts do note that food tastes different in orbit as opposed to what it tastes like here on the ground. One of the reasons that that could happen is there is a fluid shift when astronauts are in microgravity, and so because of that fluid shift, it might actually lessen their taste and smell perception. Also, when you're eating, most of what you're tasting comes from what you're smelling. So if there is that fluid shift, you might not be smelling as much, therefore not tasting things that may not appear to be as flavorful. But we do actually take some measures to compensate for that. We offer Tabasco sauce, we offer picante sauce and hot sauce, things to jazz it up, spice things up a little bit. Some astronauts' tastes change from Earth to when they are in orbit. Someone says that they can't live without orange juice for breakfast, then when they get into space, they can't stand orange juice. There's not necessarily an explanation for it, it just sometimes happens. Or some astronauts don't particularly like something on the ground, and when they're up there, they can't get enough of it.
When an astronaut's getting ready to go into orbit, how do they decide what they're going to eat? How do they pick the food and create a menu for themselves?
The astronauts come to our lab and they actually go through a process called approbation, where they consume the menu the way it has been planned for them. So they will come to our lab and they will eat breakfast. They'll eat the entire breakfast that's planned for them. Then they'll eat lunch, and that gives them the opportunity to eat the food as they would in space and see how much they like it. Because when they're in our lab going through a food evaluation session, they're only eating 1 or 2 bites of each food item, and that's not a good indicator, or a very good indicator of how well they like a food. When they come in and they sit down and they eat breakfast and they eat an entire serving of scrambled eggs or an entire serving of waffles, then they can say, yeah, I like it that much. I definitely want that on my menu, or no way, just a bite or 2 is enough. I'm not eating that. Or they might decide that they like something so much that they want it to repeat more than once on their menu, so that gives them the opportunity to taste everything again, give feedback before their menu is finalized, because it is very important that the astronauts eat exactly what they want and they're never given something that they don't like.
On early missions, shuttle crews were all given the exact same meal to eat. Although always nutritious, astronauts would sometimes be stuck with a food they didn't like. NASA scientists soon realized personalized meals made more sense. So after the 7th shuttle mission, NASA began allowing each astronaut to choose their own menu. Currently, International Space Station astronauts can choose from hundreds of different food items to make up their personal menu. When an astronaut's menu's been chosen, it's analyzed by a dietitian to make sure it's nutritionally appropriate. Once the menu's approved, the meals are packaged and placed in containers for spaceflight.
This is a food container that they use on the International Space Station. This is what all of their food items are stowed in. It's labeled on 3 sides with labels. All of the American food that is on the space station has a blue label, and all of the Russian food containers have red labels. And each label has a lot of information on it. It describes what kind of food container it is. We've broken foods down into different categories. This actually is a meat and entrees container. It has a container number, so for inventory tracking purposes, we have that. Barcode also serves for that purpose. A big number 9 that shows what ISS expedition crew gets this container, so when they're unloading and moving around containers, because space is at a premium on the space station, it's a lot easy to identify your mission's increment number. And of course, bilingual labels, so we have things in Cyrillic. Food items are stowed in these containers very efficiently. Every bit of the space is utilized. And what's unique about these containers is they're actually collapsible. These pins remove from these containers and these walls collapse. So it encourages the crew members to break these containers down. They're actually recyclable containers. Each one of these food containers actually holds enough food for 3 crew members for one day. So that gives you an idea of how much food is required and just how much space it takes up.
With feedback from the crews, the food being processed for space is moving even closer to being as Earth-like as possible.
The most requested food item for astronauts in space is shrimp cocktail. Some other favorites include steak, lemonade, and brownies. Coming up on part 2 of this special edition of Destination Tomorrow, Jennifer Pulley speaks with Michelle Perchonik about how NASA plans to feed astronauts in the future. And Johnny Alonso speaks with astronaut Mike Foale about what it's actually like to live and eat in space. But first, did you note the term a square meal came from the fact that early British soldiers carried a small square cutting board with them to be used at meal times? When a soldier had enough food to cover the cutting board, he had a square meal. That's all for this edition of NASA's Destination Tomorrow. I'm Kara O'Brien. For all of us here at NASA, we'll see you next time.